What is crack-a-lackin', fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale coming at you without my co-host Grant Hughes, but I am joined by the equally certified fantabulous and thermonuclear AF, friend of the podcast, co-worker of mine at Bleacher Report, where he's a multi-platform editor. He also covers the NBA at Forbes, covers the Sixers at Liberty Ballers, and hosts the fantastic NBA podcast called the NBA Podcast. Follow them on Twitter at the NBA Pod, spelled exactly as it sounds. You know by now, his name is Brian Toporek. Follow him on Twitter as well at B Toporek. That's at BTOPOREK. We are here to talk about the biggest questions we have remaining for the NBA season following the deadline, getting into just a lot of like what's going on the court now that we've moved past the transaction stuff. This is being recorded on Friday, February 9th, before I begin my, quite frankly, well-deserved vacation. But we have a ton of content coming out for you in the pipeline. We have banked. There will be a total of 6 podcasts coming out while I am gone. And so we did not short shrift you on the content. BT was kind enough to come on and go through this exercise. So if anything major happens, if OG Anunoby announces that he's leaving the Knicks for the Charlotte Hornets in free agency early, we won't be able to cover it or react. I apologize if that becomes outdated. If a team is smart enough to pick up Frank Ntilikina off the waiver wire and start him and then win the title, I won't be able to react to it. Brian, first and foremost, how the heck are you doing?
I'm good, Dan. Thank you for having me. I'm glad I can fill the BR quota. We need 2 BR people here at all times, so happy to fill in for Grant. And congratulations on surviving another trade deadline. Big news as always for all of us. I was up till 1:30 last night, so I apologize if my brain is pudding today, but we will do our best to make it through.
So I slept from, and this wasn't purely trade deadline related, but I slept from about 3:30 in the morning until 7 in the morning. So my brain might be pudding as well.
Good.
And look, Brian and I little peek behind the curtain. Brian was my editor for the live grades, which is just so having like a true sicko of the NBA be your editor during that makes the process so much easier because it's a frenetic time. Like he's feeding me details that I'm not seeing. So he's a heavy lift. So he deserves all the credit, but also any criticism for stuff that you disagree with. So he just directed all towards him as well. But no, seriously, he makes that a lot easier and a lot more enjoyable. And I said to him, I want to know there was one point we were talking about something so stupid and like,
Oh yeah.
minute. And I was like, how many people who are doing the same exercise, like at these other outlets, do you think are having this exact conversation right now? And we settled on like maybe Kevin Pelton with ESPN.
Yep. I think it was Pelton Hollinger. I don't even
Oh
remember
yeah,
what it
Hollinger for
was.
sure.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm glad we could rage together yesterday at the newsbreakers who were slopping it up ever so steadily trickling out. Oh, by the way, the Knicks traded 2 picks and Quentin Grimes for Alec Burks. It's like, huh?
I don't want to belabor this because I yelled about it on the live stream afterwards. Shams just stopped mentioning players. He like reported that Phoenix trade and was like, Phoenix creates 2 roster spots. It's like, motherfucker, who are they sending out? Like,
And the OKC deal, you're like, wait, Micic is in here? We find that
yeah,
out like hours later.
oh, just a crap show. However,
Yeah.
it's in the past, and now we look
That's right.
towards the future. So, what is the first question that, as a guest, that you have, whether it's team, big picture? What do you got for me?
Maybe I'm channeling my podcast co-host Morton Jensen on this
Oh
one
boy.
because he used to be a Chicago Bulls fan until they broke him, and I think a lot of Bulls fans are rapidly reaching that point. Because I think my biggest question coming out of the deadline is what the F are the Chicago Bulls doing here? I mean, I don't know if you saw the quotes coming out from Arturas Konashovas's press conference yesterday. Will Gottlieb of CHGO Sports was sharing them on Twitter, and it was like honestly a nice palate cleanser after the deadline because you are so frenzied and trying to gather all these details, and then you're seeing this guy talking about a team that's now 2 games under 500. He's like, I don't know if it's too early to say if this season was a success or a failure. I just want to keep us competitive. And it's like, what are we talking about competitive here? You aren't winning a damn thing. You would be lucky to be a top 6 seed. You will be lucky to make the playoffs. And if you do, you are going to get annihilated in the first round. So were those 2 games of home playoff revenue worth keeping Andre Drummond through the deadline when you are likely going to lose him for nothing this offseason? What happens if DeMar DeRozan walks this offseason? You lose him for nothing. Like they are clinging to this mediocrity that I just do not understand. And I mean, I would be horrified right now. Like as I was reading those quotes yesterday, I was just like, if I was a Bulls fan, that would be my breaking point. That would be my Joker moment. I'd be out. I would just be completely out hearing the guy who is running this team talk about them in this way.
Yeah, and then you saw there's the report from Yahoo that DeMar DeRozan says he's open to returning to Chicago if the money's right. And so you
Mm-hmm.
get into this weird tug of war where they could lose these players for nothing, but they have Andre Drummond's early bird rights. They have DeMar DeRozan's bird rights. What's to stop them from just paying these dudes and running it back as is and being either worse because DeMar DeRozan's older, or will Lonzo Ball be healthier next year? Zach LaVine could be healthier next year. But then you also remember, well, like Reinsdorf isn't, the most spendy owner. And so you look at their like financial situation moving forward. It's, well, are they really going to pay Patrick Williams as extension eligible? Andre Drummond deserves, I don't think he's going to get a ton of money, but he'll get a raise, I'm assuming. And then DeMar to stick around, even in a comparable number, the finances start to get a little bit scrunchy for a team that is as spendthrift as they typically are. And it also bugged me a little bit of those comments that you saw from AK, was him saying, no, like, and if he's covering for them, that's his job.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's true that he has the green light to rebuild and has actively chosen not to, I like that's malpractice on the part of just like, you're like, it's malpractice. Like, it's not fair to the fans because what are you spinning your wheels towards? And they're not even in a position because of, okay, so they're going to convey a pick to the Spurs have their 2025 pick, and then they're like pick neutral after that, right? In terms of first, you don't even have the equity though to, like, if you wanted to double down, and that's the danger here. But what if they do that? What if they trade another 2 first round picks to try and get player X? I don't know who player X is. And so this season, I don't even know what to watch for. Like, Zach LaVine is gone. People have argued that they're better off, well, done for the year, excuse me. People have argued they're better off without him, but they kind of started to find their momentum with him. Kobe White has been a good story. I think Ayo Dosunmu has been a pretty good story. Javon Carter's worked out. Like, they have a lot of Andre Drummond. I think their environment is, to me, uniquely built to insulate Andre Drummond's worst tendencies on defense, not so much on offense at times. And I think that's why he looks so good. And then there's, he's grabbing a ton of offensive rebounds because they're not the best offensive team either. But like, there's all these in a vacuum, like, good things. Like, DeMar DeRozan has still been, his efficiency overall in the clutch is really good. And the defensive pressure they can bring is great. To what end? And you just outlaid it. A first round exit is this team ceiling. And so I don't know the pathway if they're not, as people who cover the league at large, I do understand that we can over romanticize or exaggerate the idea of it's title or bust. But like, you need to have, if you're somewhere in the middle, that's fine. But you then need to have a path forward to get out of it. And I don't see Chicago's. I don't like, is Kobe White needs to develop into an all NBA player? Is it we're just banking on Lonzo Ball's knees to suddenly not be made of jello? And that's not a shot at him. It really sucks what happened to him because he was really probably the key ingredient to that entire team, just based off his skill set and what he did, not only defensively, but as a ball mover offensively. So I don't understand the path forward here for them to get better. And this just feels like, to not strip it down. And I understand the Zach LaVine injury threw a wrench in the plans, but this is now 3 years since the Vooch trade, and they haven't done jack shit, like, to really just rejigger the roster midseason. And they're just treading water in not even the middle, but the sub middle. And it's a very uninspiring and, I would argue, hopeless place to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably stems from ownership, as you said, Reinsdorf. I can't imagine he's going to pay the tax for the 9 seed. And okay, maybe they're the 6 seed next year. Like, I still don't think the Bulls are going to pay the luxury tax unless they look like an absolute hammer lock to make it to like the conference finals at least. So not only do you have this, you're stuck in the middle because of the roster you've assembled, but you don't have an owner who's going to help spend your way out of it. If I remember correctly, I don't think they've spent their mid-level exception this year, which, okay, fine. Who on the market could have made a huge difference for them at the MLE. Oh, actually, sorry. It looks like they
Yeah, they gave
part of
they
it.
had I think they used Javon Carter, got most of it.
But so they've got $6 million
But
left of it.
they didn't use the injury except like that's a more aggressive owner might have been like, hey, we have this disabled player exception. I'm gonna figure out a way to use it. And I know those things don't get, but like you knew as soon as that came in, the Bulls aren't gonna use it. Like that's not happening.
Yeah. And I mean, this is like, you're absolutely right. I would almost compare them to the New York Knicks in that way. Like after they got Julius Randle, they were also, I don't want to say like stuck in the middle, but it was hard to see the path. How do we get from here to championship contender? Then they get Jalen Brunson. And then they just start chaining together these just really solid moves. The Josh Hart, the Dante DiVincenzo, now OG Anunoby, and what they just did at the deadline. And now, the dust settled on after the trade deadline, and everyone's like, oh my God, the Knicks are a legitimate title contender. So maybe that's the Bulls' plan, is just chain together a couple of hits in a row and something good is going to come of it, or maybe Lonzo does come back. But it is just really hard to see the vision, especially when you have a front office executive who is saying, we are trying to remain competitive and we are not willing to embrace taking a step back to take 2 steps forward later. It's just, we're gonna continue running back the same core and hope it gets better one year, I guess, which doesn't really feel like a plan to me.
And the difference with them too is that, and I didn't agree with everything the Knicks did during this time, I'll make that clear, but like they made that KP trade and put themselves in a position to where they were pick positive, not pick negative like the Bulls are. But you mentioned the Knicks, which is for my first question, and it's more of a macro one, but I used it as a focus on the Knicks. Who is, and this encapsulates a lot, the second best team in the Eastern Conference? I think the best team is clearly Boston. I just recorded a long podcast with Carter Rodriguez of the Chase Down pod. The Cavs are just on fire, and people were overblowing like the fit issues between Evan Mobley and Jared Allen. I think it's more of a question in the playoffs than anything. Darius Garland's back and taking more threes. You have the Bucks, who are just like, I understand they're not playing well yet under Doc Rivers, but they have Patrick Beverley now, and just like they're still a really good team. Yeah. And then you also have the Sixers, who I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit, so we don't have to like, I'm talking more about the Knicks here, but like you have the Sixers, and it's, well, Joel Embiid comes back, why wouldn't they be? They just got Buddy Hield, who was a really good pickup despite what local media and fans think. So, and then there's the Knicks, who would be my pick, I think, at this point, with Cleveland looming. I'm not gonna lie, and Milwaukee just makes me. So I'm just saying that I would pick every team, but the Knicks, I think, would be my pick at this juncture if they were healthier. And that's what's fascinating to me, is that race for second is, okay, the Cavs have gotten healthier. The Bucks they're fairly healthy, even though Chris Middleton doesn't look the same on defense. And then we know the Sixers aren't healthy because of Embiid. They've been banged up like 8 ways towards Sunday. But the Knicks, OG Anunoby is going to miss time, like a week or two past the All-Star break is when he's slated to be reevaluated. Julius Randle's kind of on that same timeline with his dislocated shoulder. Mitchell Robinson is going to resume on-court activity soon, I think, over the All-Star break. And so when is he coming back? Isaiah Hartenstein's been dealing with stuff. Everyone's dealing with stuff this time of year, but Jalen Brunson has been banged up. And so you look at this team and it's, well, if they're at full strength, like they might be the answer. And you have to like everything they've done. And Chris Herring had a great piece on ESPN about how OG Anunoby has impacted their offense. And it's drifted back a bit, but he's missed time. And now you have Randle missing time. Getting rid of two higher usage players in Emmanuel Quickley and RJ Barrett, or if you don't even want to say higher usage, people who prefer to operate on ball, and then also RJ Barrett, Jalen Brunson, and Julius Randle, who all want to operate from the same side of the floor. It just opened things up for them. And so they're so much more intriguing, not only defensively, but offensively. And they're even more intriguing now because Burks can be a little hijacky at points, but like he's a good offensive player. And then Bojan just fits everywhere. And if one of your bigs is healthy because of who they are, and Hartenstein and Robinson, and because of I understand he's a frustrating defender, and I would say on balance, not a good defender, but Julius Randle like covers actual dudes, like really good players. And so because of the assignments he lifts, you can actually just say, hey, we'll play OG Julius Randle a big, and then Bojan can be on the court with Jalen Brunson too. That's something you could do. The caveat to all of this is, when are these guys going to get healthy? What do they look like? And I'm curious as someone who follows the Knicks intimately, just because I'm in market and I grew up a Knicks fan, I think this is a typical national media slant, but I'm having this as someone who is following them intimately. I've almost wondered, is it a blessing in disguise that these guys are going to be spared from Tom Thibodeau's workload through part of January and February? And I'm not trying to be facetious there.
Yeah.
And so it's like having Julius Randle get a breather, having OG Anunoby, who's always dealing with something. I can't remember who tweeted this. It was someone from Raptors Twitter. I apologize, but they were just like, you have to be prepared with anything for OG Anunoby. Falls on the floor, bruises his elbow, goes to get sushi, tears his ACL or something. So it was, and so I'm just wondering, like, does this almost set them up better? Or is it like, well, we kind of need to have a conversation about they're missing a lot of key ingredients right now. And we don't know what they're going to look like or necessarily when they're going to come back.
Yeah. No, I think it's health permitting, assuming the Knicks enter the playoffs with all of those guys, including Robinson. I would lean toward them as the second best team in the East right now. The Cavs are a close third, and the Bucks still have time to turn it around, but they're screaming who they are at this point. Like they are now 1-5 under Doc Rivers, and I know guys have been in and out of the lineup, so I don't want to overreact to a 6-game sample size. We'll get Patrick Beverley in there, but I mean Doc Rivers is not exactly known as the best playoff coach of all time.
What did someone tweet too? Did you see that? Has any coach ever taken over a job, gotten hired on a multi-year deal midseason, then gotten fired at the same time? Doc could make history.
That might be his plan, actually. He wasn't satisfied with $16 million of golf money from Josh Harris, so he's like, you know what? I got some international trips to be paid for. So yeah, I mean, the Doc stuff and just the Bucks defense in general has me concerned. I mean, the Knicks defensively are great. Offensively, as you mentioned, OG has really juiced them up, and Bojan and Burks, I think, are only going to do favors for them on that end of the floor, especially in the absence of OG. And, like, not only to your point about those guys not getting the Tibbs minutes in January, February, and whenever they come back in March, but now the Knicks are so legitimately deep of NBA caliber, playoff caliber rotation players that I would hope, at least, that Tibbs doesn't play his guys 40 minutes per game, especially in the regular season, but possibly not even in the playoffs. Like there's a chance that they can go a legit 8, 9, even potentially 10 deep. So I feel like,
good point.
Usually I feel one of the knock on Tibbs teams is that he plays his guys so many minutes during the regular season that there isn't like this level that they can scale up in the playoffs. And I think that Knicks have given him so much depth that now he definitely should not be playing guys once they're all healthy. Definitely should not be playing his normal like 38 minutes per game, but he might not even need to in the playoffs. So maybe the Knicks will have an ability to level up that they haven't had in the past under Tibbs for that reason. Like if they do need to play Brunson 40 minutes a night, they could still lean on that, but now they also have all of these other guys who can initiate the offense for them, or if Brunson needs gets banged up or whatever, like they have enough insurance basically at every position that, I mean, are we sure that they're not going to win the East? Is this crazy to think that they could at least potentially beat Boston?
I don't think it's crazy at all. And this is a quick tangent, and Jonathan Macri of Knicks Film School, and anyone who listens knows, love the work that him and Andrew Claudio do over at Knicks Film School, was talking about kind of the fallout from the trade deadline, how all the national media and podcasts were complimenting the Knicks and they weren't used to it.
Yeah.
I know fans don't necessarily care about this. Like the Leon Rose for Executive of the Year, like bandwagon probably needs to, like, if it hasn't departed already, it needs to depart now. And what you mentioned is interesting because that is still kind of my concern, is just like Burks can initiate, not the best passer though. And then Bojan Bogdanovic can run. He's run pick and rolls this year. He's not like going to facilitate. And so I worry about their secondary playmaking behind Brunson, behind Randall, now that you don't have Quickly or Barrett, but like you have enough just ball movers, maybe not traditional initiators, and Josh Hart and Dante DiVincenzo, that I think, as you said, you've given yourself optionality. My almost bigger question would be, what version of Julius Randle do you get in the playoffs? And that's where the Bojan Bogdanovic and Alec Burks acquisitions come up huge from the pure shot creation standpoint. Is if Julius, and maybe he'll be better because he's never been to the postseason with the Knicks and not had RJ Barrett with him as well. So like opening that up could help him. And also he'll be coming off a season in which he played a lot fewer minutes this year. But if he doesn't have it, you now aren't relying on, Quickly was small. We saw how the Cavs kind of frustrated him and what happened to his floater game. And then RJ Barrett's just always been up and down. Like if he's not getting to the basket, he was always a wild card once he got there. And the Knicks, to be fair, never felt like they were good at getting him ahead of steam, which the Raptors have done off the ball when he's played a good amount. So But now that you've replaced that with someone, either guys who are more reliable floor spacers or just more reliable creators, that's kind of that's the wild card to me is will Tibbs pull that lever of Bojan at the 4 and Julius Randle's minutes are coming down if Julius Randle's playing like he has in the playoffs in the past. And I would say there's also the caveat though, like Julius Randle and Jalen Brunson, because of the shots that they're taking and creating, Bojan Bogdanovic and Alec Burks are not taking those same shots. And so these two players are still ultra central to the Knicks offense. And so that is still where my question lies. But to your point about can they come out of the East? The answer is yes. It's just, would you predict it? And once you get into the playoffs, like, I think it's easier to answer this question for the regular season and just say Cavs or Knicks and move on. But once you get to the playoffs, that's where Milwaukee just gets a little bit more interesting because of Dame, like the top end talent of Dame and Giannis. Even the Cavs, if they sort of figure things out, are they still staggering the way they do? Does Isaac Okoro have a longer leash? Is he hitting his threes? And if he's not, are Sam Merrill and Max Strus, are they getting heavy enough minutes to open up the floor anyway? But I think my answer right now would be in net, who's the second best team in the East or the second most likely team to emerge from the East? I think it might be the Knicks. And I'm not sure if this is prisoner of the moment stuff. And I'm like you, I almost have the Cavs above the Bucks right now, but I will default to the Bucks because of just the top end talent there. And that's just like, that's not a great answer. And then I don't know what's going on in Philly. And maybe that's the good side. I'm assuming you have something on the Sixers moving forward. They're the biggest wild. I'm talking about the Knicks as a wild card. They've kind of entrenched themselves as something. The Sixers are just a huge wild card for the rest of this year.
Yeah, they're taking Miami's spot from last year as the
I didn't
8th
even
seed that
mention
no one
how
wants to
far
face.
Miami has fallen. We don't even mention them.
I know. Well, I mean, we got to have one team from the play-in make it to the NBA Finals, and maybe
It'll
that
be
could be
them.
the Sixers this year. Because I
Oh,
mean,
okay.
they are, as you mentioned, they are hilariously injury ravaged right now, and not only Embiid, but Melton has been out for a while with a lumbar spine issue. Nick Batum's been in and out of the lineup with a hamstring. Tobias Harris has been in and out with multiple illnesses. Now Tyrese Maxey has an illness. And as you mentioned, we're recording this on Friday, February 9th. It is unclear whether he's going to play against Atlanta tonight. Like the Sixers legit, if Buddy Hield and Cam Payne can't play, legit will have 9 healthy players. That includes Maxey, who did not look healthy the last game out. So All-Star break cannot get here soon enough for the Sixers. And then coming out of the All-Star break, I think their schedule is like Cleveland, New York, Boston, Milwaukee is the first 4 games. So
Well, New York might not be at full strength, won't be at full strength at that point. So there's that.
that's true. Okay. I mean I think it's gonna get worse before it's gonna get better for the Sixers, but like after the calendar flips to March, there's a chance that they go on a late season run and maybe secure one of these top 6 seeds. But yeah, I mean, it all comes down to, does Joel Embiid come back this year? And I would imagine part of that will depend on where they are in the standings. Like, I don't know if he needs to rush back if they're the 9 seed by the time he comes back, because that means at best you're getting a first round matchup against Boston that you're probably going to lose. So if they stay in the top 6, and depending on who they face in the first round, I mean, they'll be live against anyone potentially. But the vibes were certainly better a couple weeks ago than they are right now, and it is fair to wonder. You mentioned the mixed reaction to their trade deadline, and we were laughing about it yesterday as we were doing these live grades because you were pretty in favor of what they did. I heard the live stream that you and Grant did yesterday. You guys seemed to like what they did. Kevin Pelton gave them a ton of good grades for his trade grades. Dan Devine of Yahoo Sports had them as a winner. And meanwhile, I'm on the Liberty Ballers Slack trying to talk everyone off the edge yesterday. Like they were, it was just a Daryl Morey mutiny waiting to happen. So, I think it's hard to say what they're going to look like because we don't know when these guys are going to get back to full strength, if they're going to get back to full strength this year. But the Sixers have been one of the worst shooting teams in the NBA this season. Buddy Hield is one of the best shooters over the past decade, honestly. So he is going to address a major need, and you could certainly imagine, the dribble handoff actions that Embiid and JJ Redick or Embiid and Steph Curry used to do, and even the 2-man game with Embiid and Maxey this year. Hield is not as dangerous off the dribble as Maxey, obviously, but I think there can be a lot of 2-man chemistry or even 3-man chemistry with Maxey, Embiid, and Hield. So I'm excited. Hopefully we see it this year because Hield will be a free agent this summer. So it'd be bummer if they make this trade, Embiid never comes back and Hield leaves in free agency.
Yeah.
But in theory, a really good fit next to those two guys. There are concerns about him holding up defensively in the playoffs, but if they have Batum and Melton and Tobias Harris and Kelly Oubre, if all those guys are healthy, they don't necessarily need to rely on him if there's a certain matchup where he's getting picked on. So I think you're
You could
right to
also
identify.
insulate him with Melton, Tobias
Yeah,
Harris, and Joel Embiid if he's out. Like the Pacers couldn't insulate him. I feel like the Sixers could. And I was going to ask you, that's kind of, I mean, like the big question for this, and maybe this gets dated by the time this goes live on Monday, but will Joel Embiid play again this season? And I tried to read into what they did at the deadline as like, well, does this, I find it what they did at the deadline because it was Buddy Hield. I ultimately think the opportunity cost was just so low and didn't impact their long-term plans that they would do it even if they knew Embiid wasn't going to play this season. But when you
mm,
do tie that to the way that it's been reported, like there's just this mystery about his injury and what he even had done, uh, that it leads me to believe that the door actually is still open for him to play this season. And so they were still trying to straddle those lines. And I mean, you mentioned it in jest, but like that's a huge wild card because what if they are a playing team? I don't really like they have somewhat of a cushion, and I'm so annoyed with Orlando for not doing anything. So I'm just not going to
yeah,
trust them. And like maybe Miami catches them, but you're still 4 games ahead in the loss column. If Embiid's going to come back this year, you have time. But if he's going to come back and you're in the play, and you might just like that's all of a sudden. Imagine pulling that matchup as
yeah,
Boston. And it's just like, no, you wouldn't predict the Sixers to win it, but you go through all this to have the 1 seed, and then you just get a fully healthy Sixers team with Buddy Hield's gravity
yeah.
entering the postseason.
It would, yeah. If Embiid comes back, it's going to be a bad beat for whichever one of these four: Boston, Cleveland, Milwaukee, New York, whichever one I think gets the Sixers in the first round. That's going to suck for them for sure.
I have a question for you.
Okay.
Which team do you trust more? Like for the rest of the season, but looking at playoff stock, now that we're past the deadline, they can't make moves beyond buyouts. The Minnesota Timberwolves or the Oklahoma City Thunder?
Ooh, I think Oklahoma City. I actually, uh, maybe I'm overreacting, but I don't know that it's particularly close either. I mean, the OKC
Ooh.
adding Gordon Hayward like flew under the radar because he's always hurt and he hasn't played in over a month.
I
And
do I do respect that the Hornets were clearly holding him out so that he couldn't nuke his trade value.
yeah,
I don't know if you saw the quote. I don't know if you saw the quotes from him, but he was just like, "Yeah, I'm ready to go." And so it's like,
oh,
"Oh,
like
Charlotte wasn't fucking around." They were like,
I
"This
didn't
dude's
see
lower
that.
body is
Okay,
potentially
so
cooked." So when I saw because he hadn't played since December, and I was like,
yeah,
"He must be on the verge of a return. Otherwise, why are you giving up anything for him?" And
right.
I guess they were just like, "Buddy, we're putting you in caution tape and bubble wrap, and we're shipping you out on
like
February 8th."
we know what's gonna happen if you play more than 25 games. Absolutely not, Gordon. Go on vacation for a month. That's interesting. Okay, well that makes me feel even better about OKC. But with all due respect to Trey Mann and Micic and Bertans, like none of those guys were key contributors, especially to their playoff rotation. Now you add in Gordon Hayward, who I think at least could be if healthy, and gives them an out in case opponents are just not respecting Josh Giddey on the perimeter. So
Yeah.
I really like that as an upgrade for them. I mean, Minnesota has been great all year. I don't want to take away from what Minnesota does. This is not me saying
Don't
they're
worry, I'm
definitely going
about to.
to. Okay,
After
good.
you're done, I'm about to, so you
Good.
don't need
Yeah.
to.
I'm not necessarily saying they're going to lose in the first round, but I do have, their offense bogs down, especially late in games during crunch time, and I have some concerns about that. Um, the double big lineup is very effective against a lot of teams, but all it takes is one bad matchup for that not to work as
Yeah.
well as it has. And I think Oklahoma City, based on the personnel it has more variability. They can alter like shapeshift more based on their matchup than Minnesota, where you're not gonna like bench Karl-Anthony Towns or Rudy Gobert. I don't think at all. I mean, I'd be shocked if they're down like 2-1 in a series, and that's their big mid-series adjustment. I think they're just gonna have to go down with the ship. Whereas, again, if Josh Giddey is a disaster, okay, we're going Gordon Hayward, or we can go with Cason Wallace, or like they have so many different guys they can turn to outside of their big three, all of whom are just terrifyingly good and still so young that they're only going to get better.
I think I would agree with you. I might think it's a little bit closer because I am a big believer in what and I'm saying you're not, but I am a big
Mm-hmm.
believer in what the Wolves have built. I just with the Thunder, and I saw people. What makes me feel a little bit better about the Thunder is you mentioned the optionality they now have with a Gordon Hayward, and it does seem even before the trade, it was very clear that it was well, if we got to push pull the ripcord on Josh Giddey and or Lou Dort crunch time minutes, we're
Mm-hmm.
gonna do it. And so the fact that they are doing that, it just makes you feel better by default. Because I also don't think as everyone got caught up, and we probably even got caught up a little bit on this podcast about, well, they need like size or heft or bounce up front to pair with Chet. Playing five out is so important to what they do. Like this team utilizes drive and kicks and flinging the ball around more than any other team in the league. It's not even when you look at drives per game, it's not even close. They lead it by like a monster margin. And so I feel better about that. Minnesota's defense definitely has a higher ceiling when you're looking at the guys that are there between Anthony Edwards and the way Rudy Gobert has played for much of this season and Jaden McDaniels. My thing with the Wolves, though, is there's the turnovers, of course. Everyone's belabored how important Mike Conley is to the team to the point that it's unsettling. Guess
Mm-hmm.
what? Like, you've lost the minutes Mike Conley plays without Anthony Edwards anyway. It's like, what does Monte Morris actually change for you? He's not a high volume 3-point shooter, which is someone that I think they need. Like, I would have liked to have seen them been in on a Luke Kennard,
Mm-hmm.
or been more aggressive and said, hey, like maybe we'll trade Naz Reid to go get Malcolm Brogdon. I know that was unpopular amongst Wolves fans. They've been great. So you don't trade one of your 6 best players just because. I understand that notion. And they are better off. They have a game manager now, but there's something off about their offense in the sense of it's not just the turnovers, but there's not a willingness to try new things, I feel like. And maybe having Monte Morris changes that, but I don't think it will. And so you watch them, it's gotten more press recently, but like they've had struggles keeping big leads this year.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I noticed on offense is just like, and hat tip to Dane Moore, the NBA podcast. Do you know how many corner threes Karl-Anthony Towns has made this year?
I do not.
7 outside of garbage time.
Wow.
That was on cleaning the glass. I think he might be at 8 for the year. He's made 7 corner. He's 7 of 29, I think, from the corners outside of garbage time. So he's just not there. And then you have Rudy Gobert with his comments. And this is like a big deal because Gobert is not the one taking these shots. He's not even the one setting up these shots aside from his verdict, like his roll gravity can help create them. He was talking about the other night how important it is for Minnesota to shoot the 3 ball. And so it's like he's not even the dude who's taking the shots. If he said, I'll take a 3-pointer over a 2-pointer any day. And it's just like, this is someone who's actively like that would, by him saying that he would take a 3 over a 2, he's not talking about himself. He's
Right.
actively saying, I wouldn't need the ball as much, or I don't want to score as much. And I know that's not his role anyway. So it's just like, there's something off there about and I'm not blaming it on Towns. I feel like this is more of a Chris Finch issue, or maybe it's just the lack of outside of Mike Conley. Like, yes, Anthony Edwards is a good passer. He's not a great passer. And so maybe that comes down to that a little bit. There's also a spacing issue where, like, against this team, you don't need guys to, one, they either don't care about some of your shooters, and so they will roam off the corners, or maybe they just don't feel the need to roam off the corners because it's just everyone's within enough proximity of everybody else. Their offense is just like, you can't hover around the bottom 10 of points per possession and then just go win the title. That's just not how it's going to
Mm-hmm.
work. And I just don't know if they have the tools to, a lot of what you see with Oklahoma City, they don't have the tools to be a better rebounding team. That's just not going to happen. But like defensive rebounding issues versus total offensive issues, it's not like that's almost what it comes down to for me when we're discussing these two teams. And I still remain high on Minnesota. I think that they are legitimate. They could win it all and it wouldn't shock me. But there's just something off about their offense that I don't know if it's fixable. And you could just say, well, Karl-Anthony Towns needs to be in the corner more or just take more threes in general. We're specifically with this group, we're now in season 1.65 of singing that same song. I mean, he wasn't really playing last year, so that was part of it. I don't know that there's a way for them to be better than they've been now, but I don't know if it's
Mm-hmm.
much like, can they be much better than they've been now over not just a sustained period of time, but a sustained period of time in which these teams have like they're focusing on just you in the best of 7 set. And that's the biggest difference between playoff basketball is the rest and the preparation time and focus.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, we've seen Gobert against certain matchups really struggle in the playoffs in past years. I
Honestly,
wonder.
I'm more worried about Cat in matchups
Yeah,
than I am Gobert. I'm not gonna like.
I'm just worried in general. Like, the two big thing is working really well for them in the regular season, and I think that was basically what they're doing this year in the regular season is what we expected out of them last year. Like, when they made the trade, it was pretty well received. It was like, okay, that was a lot to give up for Rudy Gobert, and that you might
We
come to
loved it
regret that.
around these
Yeah, but it
parts.
was like, the Timberwolves should be an easy 50-win regular season team. The concern was not the regular season; it was what does this look like when the playoffs come around? And I know Denver has said Minnesota was the toughest matchup that they had in the playoffs last year, and that was with no Jaden McDaniels and like they and Karl-Anthony Towns out for half the year. So this is a better version of that Timberwolves team. Um, but yeah, I think there are reasons to be concerned about them. I'd say probably there are more reasons to be concerned about them than there are OKC. Like OKC, it really feels like just youth and inexperience is the biggest issue, and just NBA
We're
history has
and
showed that
we're more
teams.
forgiving of that by like default, but I also think there is, and that might be coloring the way that I view it, and maybe even the way you view it is there's an urgency here because no one
Yeah.
wants to hear about this, but like they're going to be the second apron, they're coming up towards it, and like
Oh, they have to break this team up after this
right,
year.
and they have until the end of next season to do it. It's like everyone,
Yep.
but it might happen over the like if they flame out in the playoffs, which I honestly think that their defense is going to hold up a lot better than people think in the postseason. It's just their offense and the the bigger difference from OKC is you framed it perfectly. Like with the youth and the experience, you could be more forgiving of that. It's also just they have more modes to toggle between than I think this
Mm-hmm.
Wolves team does right now, even though they are deep. Like Kyle Anderson's not had a good year, but it's still Kyle Anderson. And now you
Right.
add someone in Monte Morris who will be a part of your playoff rotation. And like, yes, Jordan McLaughlin's had some nice moments, but him usurping Shake Milton and Troy Brown Jr. in the rotation was okay, good for Jordan McLaughlin, but like that's not ideal. And now so
Right.
but you have Monte Morris, you have Nickeil Alexander Walker. That's someone who can play in the playoffs. I feel good about this team, but I felt great about them like a month and a half ago. And I think that I was just kind of blind to some of these offensive issues where like, and what I think is frustrating about it is to use Cleveland as an example, just looking at their bigs. I know Evan Mobley's embracing the three ball a little bit more since he's come back from injury and
Mm-hmm.
he's hit like 4 or 5 of them. And it's like, wow, if he could just do that. Like it's the,
Right.
remember when Giannis in the beginning used to hit those pull up triples? It's like, he just hits like 1 or 2 of those a game, like it's over for
Yeah.
everybody. So,
Brooklyn fans are still there with Ben Simmons. It's gonna happen though at some point. Don't worry.
but like the Wolves feel like they actually have the tools within their top end unit to open up the floor more. But Karl-Anthony Towns might not, and he is so good. I don't think that he should
Yeah.
have made the All-Star team necessarily. I would have, if you had to give it to a Wolf, it would have been Gobert for me.
Mm-hmm.
But like they have the ability to open up the floor or steady the offense a little bit more. And they're not. But I also recognize that it does feel like they have a playmaking directional ceiling on that end too.
Yeah, I think it's a smart point to bring up about them feeling the urgency, or maybe us all being aware of the urgency. And I don't know. I mean, people have been talking about it, writing about it. It's been a theme throughout the year. I don't know how many Timberwolves fans are like really fixated on that right now. I'd imagine most of them are. That's a problem for later.
They
Let's just
they've
enjoy
played the
this.
like there's no tomorrow card, which I actually think is that's the smart way to view
Yeah,
it. I question whether the organization because if there's a no tomorrow card, like you couldn't have given up, like was there a way to give up more and get Tyus Jones instead of Monte
yeah.
Morris? Or like I said, the no tomorrow card would have been Nas Reed and Kyle Anderson for Malcolm Brogdon. Does Portland actually turn that down?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's the concern is that this core is just financially unsustainable beyond this year, and I think you're absolutely right about that. So, it makes me nervous going into the playoffs, and I would imagine the players are aware of this more than anything. Like NBA players are smart and they understand how. I would imagine they're looking around the league now, especially. And once we get to the off season, it's going to become very clear of like, oh, we are in a very different landscape than we were a year ago, thanks to this new CBA. So, how is this going to affect? Like, our team's going to be willing to shell out these massive luxury tax bills
Great point.
anymore and be over the second apron? No, I don't think they will unless they are, like Denver might because they just won a championship and very well could win another one this year. But unless you are a top tier championship contender, which, Minnesota is in the conversation, But if you look at, title odds right now, it's Boston, Denver, Clippers, Milwaukee, big gap. And then, Phoenix, New York, OKC, Cleveland, at least on FanDuel, Minnesota's ninth right now.
I do, just because that's a reflection of the market. I just feel like there are not enough people who care. I'm not playing that. Anyone who listens to this, I don't care if you watch the Wolves or don't, or if you're a Wolves fan and are mad at what we're saying. That feels like a lack of just like the Wolves are really good. And it's funny, you mentioned this already because of what they did last year. So we feel better about the Thunder to come out of the West, but like the Timberwolves are clearly much better suited to beat the Nuggets than the Thunder are.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know. It's honestly, I'm surprised the Thunder are that high. I'm pleasantly surprised. I think, I think the Thunder just one of the better stories of the NBA, just because even Sam Presti coming into the season was like, I don't really know how good we are. I think that was one of the surprises of the trade deadline with them, cashing in a couple chips, not big ones, but cashing in some chips for Gordon Hayward was like,
Yeah.
he said he wasn't going to do this type of thing early or heading into the season. And it's not an all-in move. I mean, they are still locked and loaded for whenever that type of move comes along. But it is
The
nice
most
to
Sam
see.
Presti thing ever would be that by the time we finish recording this podcast, they've signed Gordon Hayward to an extension. That would be the most Sam Presti.
Well, the most Sam Presti thing is that he somehow finagled another pick swap that broke at like 305 yesterday, and no one heard about it until right now.
Do you have more? Do you have another question for me?
I do. I think maybe two more. One, how much better did Dallas get at the trade deadline?
Don't do this. We already had so many mad Mavericks fans in the live stream, but
Okay. I'm
they did
sorry.
have one of the most divisive deadlines. Look, the answer is I think they're better than they were because Daniel Gafford is good. Like
Yeah.
he's shown some mid-range touch, and he'll also, it's not what peak Rashawn Holmes used to do, but it's like he will flip up shots outside of the restricted area, which gives you optionality on the rolls. And he is the type of big that should thrive alongside Luka or specifically Luka, but also Kyrie. So they are better. And PJ Washington, even this season with some uneven stuff from the outside, he has been better than Grant Williams. He has more of a floor game on offense. He makes the most out of his paint touches. I think he's actually better equipped to defend like bigger bigs than Grant Williams is, who just feels like he's ultra switchable. But you played all of your best chips to get, are they 10% better, 15% better? And is 10 to 15% better enough to win the title? And because you have Luka, and because of the way Luka's played in the playoffs, and because of the way Kyrie has played in the playoffs previously, maybe you could talk yourself into saying yes. But the opportunity cost of, I think, not materially improving your championship odds, that's the standard. I'm not saying it's title or bust, but when you're playing kind of the last of your first round assets, that is the standard. No, they're not much better off. And one of the comments we had, and I actually did respond, I don't think they ever got back to me, was, well, why can't Dallas just get more first round picks? They did it over the offseason with the salary dump from the Kings. And my question to them was, those opportunities aren't always available. And now you don't have a lot of this dispensable money just to throw around. And then I also asked, who is the player outside of Luka, outside of Kyrie, and outside of Derek Lively that you could trade this offseason and get Dallas more of a first round pick? And then who's also someone unimportant enough that you won't miss them?
Right.
There's no one. There's not even because I think Daniel Gafford was only worth a first round pick because you were sending out Rashawn Holmes in that deal. I don't think Daniel Gafford nets you a first round pick in a vacuum as a reserve big who can definitely start for you if Derek Lively's dealing with nasal stuff, but he can't. So I didn't feel great about their deadline. I know a lot of Mavs fans appreciated that they kind of undid the summer mistake, but we talked about this during the trade deadline. You used your last chips. And aside from that, it's you now turned your 2030 first round swap. Forget about the seconds because they had some inbound and outbound ones for your 2030 first round swap and your 2027 first round pick into Daniel Gafford or excuse me, into PJ Washington. And so it's that's underwhelming. And I know that PJ Washington, I think, could be better than he was shown in Charlotte, and people will probably pay more attention to him alongside Luka. He will get better 3-point quality looks with Luka and Kyrie teeing him up. I think he could be really good for this team, but the gap still between their third best player and their second best player is a chasm. It's a galaxy at this point. And yeah, there are some teams who are title contenders that are probably the same way, but there's also not. Just like, I mean, look at the Thunder, look at the Timberwolves, look at the Nuggets. There's not that huge, gulf between like your top two guys and maybe Milwaukee, but like you still kind of have Middleton and Lopez. And so like that gap is still going to be smaller than what's existing in Dallas.
Yeah, that might be another good follow-up question. Who is even the third best player on the Mavericks right now?
Well, it's sort of like by committee. It could be PJ Washington. It could be
Right.
Derek Lively. It could be Tim Hardaway Jr. legitimately.
Right.
That's a person.
Right.
It could be Josh Green. Am I missing anyone? It can't be Maxi Kleber anymore. That disappoints me.
No, it could not. No. Yeah, I think those are the big ones.
So do you think that where do you land on them?
Yeah, I mean, I asked that question because I do think it's worth like separating the context of the move, which, I think it's right to criticize it in totality, because to make that type of a move and to cash in one of your few remaining chips, it really does need to vault you into the Denver, OKC, Clippers tier, and I don't think it did for Dallas. Does it push them above Sacramento? Does it push them above New Orleans? Potentially. But, I mean,
Maybe.
if this all ends with a first-round knockout or even a second-round knockout, it's just you're playing a very dangerous game if you're the Mavericks, because you're trading these, distant picks. And, you had to trade the 28 pick swap just to get the pick from OKC to send for Gafford. Luka can become a free agent in 2027. Now, they'll probably, he's very likely, as long as he plays 65 games, he'll make all NBA one of these next couple of years. He'll become eligible for a Supermax. They'll sign him to one and whatever. So I don't necessarily think he is definitely going to leave the Dallas Mavericks by 2026 or by 2027, but there's at least that possibility, and only the top two protection on the pick that they sent for Washington. And then, as far as I know, it's a fully unprotected swap in 28. There is just a ton of long-term downside. And I think the Mavericks counterpoint to that would be, that's fine. You're absolutely right. But we have Luka Doncic and we need to maximize his time here. So what did you want us to do? And I don't have a better answer to that question because I don't know what else was available.
And I'm sorry to interrupt. I think they could have, because Luka, you can worry about the contract stuff, but you have Kyrie under contract. Luka's still young. They were the team more so than the Lakers, or even more so than maybe the Warriors. But like those teams still made the decision. You could have just done nothing and had yourself more ammo to use over the offseason and gotten someone better. That like, I'm not right now. I don't know what they could have gotten by giving up, let's just say, that swap and that first round pick. I don't know what the better. They also clearly wanted, like, let's just say, for instance, had you given up that swap and that pick, that you would have been able to get Jeremy Grant. They may have made the action. I probably would have done that, even though he wouldn't have helped their rebounding a lick. And I would argue that I don't know that PJ Washington or Daniel Gafford helps them on the glass that much either. But they made the active decision. Well, no, we need two guys in the front court, which is fine. But the other move was, and we saw them make it last season. It was, granted, it was more nuclear of just kind of bowing out of the play-in conversation towards the end. But they, to me, more so than even the Hawks, just by doing nothing, because what if Trae Young requests a trade and you've now traded future first-round equity? But like definitely more so than the Lakers and the Warriors, who did stand pat. You could have just said no, like we can find something better in the offseason. And so even if you're telling me there was an option of, well, they could have gotten Jeremy Grant, or it was PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford, or it was Kyle Kuzma, those were not your only three options. You could have sat tight, opened up. What could they have traded in the offseason? 3 first-round picks?
3 firsts, yeah.
3 firsts, swapped in, still would have had 2 more 3 and 2 swaps, right? To where now it's 1 swap and that's it, is what you can move. So they could have waited. And I know people would have been frustrated by that. I just can't talk myself into the immediate ceiling with PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford versus, like, I would have taken the road not traveled, or the road of what could have been. And so to me, it's not even just a matter of, well, what else were they supposed to do at this trade deadline? It's, well, what else could they have done this offseason? And there's definitely a scenario in which they could have gotten someone or someone's collectively better than Daniel Gafford and PJ Washington.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
You mentioned them. I have 3 teams, but if we only get to 1 or 2, this team is my kink. I think about them at night, trying to figure out what they are. I can buy into them as a pseudo title contender on one night. I'm depressed about their future the other night. How good are the New Orleans Pelicans?
Ooh, that's a good one. Yeah, I
I just
saw
Please go.
Schmidt Dua, our guy who does a great job covering the Pels, was mentioning basically like Point Zion is going to determine the second half of their season, which I think is a very fascinating
He's
thing to
back too.
monitor.
Like they
Yeah.
finally they get away from it, and I can't remember who I was listening to mentioned this, and I thought it was good, which is why I'm interrupting you. Is that do they just not trust that Zion will be available when it matters most, and that's why they get away from Point Zion so much? But I agree with you and Schmidt that Point Zion is definitely going to define their ceiling.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting just because they are in this mix of top 6 seeds, and it does still feel like they're still kind of trying to figure themselves out a little bit and figure out their hierarchy. So the answer to your question is I have no idea how good they are, and I honestly don't think they even know either. I think they are still working through a lot of like which combinations of players work best with one another. And I mean, if there's a fundamental question of who should be our primary ball handler 50 games into the season, that means we've still got a lot to figure out over these final 30 games before the playoffs begin.
Yeah, they confuse the hell out of me, and then and like I appreciate that they've tried some stuff where it's like, okay, you've seen Larry Nance Jr. start second halves, and they've been like the starting unit isn't good, but they've been good in first halves and not so much in second halves. And then it's you want to say there's Zion and Brandon Ingram, and for some of this season it was true. They're just functionally hard to build around as your two players. But then you dig into the data, it's like Zion's efficiency is just a lot better this season with both Zion and Valanciunas on the floor than with one or both of them off. And it's so, yeah, he might get to the rim a little bit more, but so like that confounds you like in totality. And then the other thing that's confusing as hell is just how good they are on the margins. And this was the problem with them when you tie it to the trade deadline is, and I didn't see a lot of people calling for them to make a move. There was a very clear, we talked about this in our Discord, join our Discord, link is in the podcast and YouTube description, that they had a clear need, but there was no one, and it's rim protection that came with one or both of roll gravity or like outside floor spacing. Those players are not available in droves, so you weren't going to find them. But if you were going to find them, they needed to be better to either one, force you to move one of your guys who are really good, or to usurp these guys in the rotation who are really good. And there's so much to like about them, though. And they've had like, so ever since they dropped to, I think it was 12 and 11, they're one game over 500. They were injured. Not to say the sky was falling, but like the vibes weren't great. Since then, they are top 5 in net rating with a top 5 offense and a top 5 defense. Herb Jones, not all the data supports this. He's better on offense. Like he's hitting the corner threes, those clips and the volume have gone up. He's just, I have never seen him perform this well in transition as a decision maker, as sort of a finisher. That's been huge for them. And then like Trey Murphy, he goes through these sort of peaks and plunges, but then it's like you look at what he does as a shooter, an off-ball mover, as even a guy who can keep the ball moving when he gets going downhill. And you look at their individual pieces, and it's Jonas Valanciunas can carry them on a night and outplay Alperen Sengun against the Rockets, in part because Zion Williamson's not playing, so you're able to feed him more. There's all this functional overlap that works, but it doesn't, like, can you reach your peak with it? And then what is the best version of yourself actually looking like? I think, again, we both, and Schmidt has pointed this out time and again, that it's with Point Zion, but like, that's not necessarily maybe Brandon Ingram's best bet, but then it also works at times, or not at times, but like we've seen it work to a high degree. And you love so many of the individual pieces on this roster, and you can go to, and they could probably do more of this, the Zion plus all shooters lineup when you're going to stagger him and Brandon Ingram. So you do have that button to press. There's so much and then also just the defense just belies their personnel at this point. I know Herb Jones is good. Trey Murphy's solid. CJ McCollum's been good this year. They've done a great job insulating him, but he's made great decisions when he's kind of defending those weak side corners. But like, you look at this team and it's okay. Zion, Ingram, Jonas Valanciunas, and CJ McCollum are playing absurdly heavy minutes. Dyson Daniels can't always stay on the floor because of how raw he is offensively. No, they're just like an elite defensive unit statistically. It's like there's so much to love about this team, but they actually, I'm wondering if they have, maybe this was the question to ask you. Do they have the highest range of outcomes among teams in the league this season, where you could say they dipped it down towards the play-in or they lost in the first round, but the Pelicans came out of the West. Like,
yeah. If you're like discounting the Sixers for injury reasons, because I
oh
think
yeah,
they're probably, but I mean, otherwise, yeah, probably so. Like you could absolutely talk yourselves into Pelicans get hot, go on a run, figure out which guys work best together. I mean, you brought up Trey Murphy. He's only shooting 35.3% from deep this year. He shot 38.2 as a rookie, 40.6 last year. Like if he bounces back to the high 30s or even low 40s, what does that do for a Pelicans
yeah.
team that, is one of the more efficient teams from deep, shooting 37.9% as a team, which ranks sixth in the NBA? They're only 23rd in 3-point attempts per game. I know it's something that drives Schmidt absolutely bonkers, as he just wants to see more shooters around Zion and BI, or just Zion or just BI. Like if you can, have guys who can fire, who can shoot,
Just get them up.
yeah, shoot efficiently and shoot in volume. Like you need high volume, high efficiency shooters. That it's really
They got to
Murphy and
Viagra it.
McCollum.
Get it up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. That's right. Exactly. So yeah, I'm curious to see how everything coalesces over these final 30 games, where they end up in the standings, and I mean they just beat the Clippers the other night, and the Clippers have been one of the best teams in the NBA over the last 2 months. So like that's the ceiling, is they can beat the best teams in the NBA. It's just, can you make it to April in one piece with Zion in particular, and then if so, which of these guys are going to be in the playoff rotation, because they frankly have too many guys that they play, and not all of them are going to play in the playoffs.
They're so maddening, and it must be maddening to cover them on a day-to-day basis of just like, well, why isn't Zion? Why does Zion as your point guard not come in drips and drabs, but like, like fade in, fade out type
Yeah.
deal. And then also it has to be you mentioned with the Zion injury, it's kind of a cliche talking point, but it feels like you're always waiting for the other shoe to drop with this team. Well, is something going to go wrong with BI or CJ or Zion? Even it's a lot of people who want to see Larry Nance get more minutes. It's like, I don't know, Larry Nance logged 20 minutes tonight. Can his knees take that type
Right.
deal?
Right.
And this team is so fascinating and infuriating at the same. Like I said, they're my kink. They're the team that just like keeps me up. I'm so high on them, but they can toy with my emotions. The dial can fluctuate from 0 to 11 on just any given moment, any given possession.
Yeah, and you brought up Minnesota earlier as a team that, how long is this course sustainable for? I know Schmidt has been all over this as well, but Valanciunas is up after this year. They're already, I think, like 150,000 or 150 million on the books for next year, if not more. I'm just basing that off of Spot Track. So once you re-sign JV, that alone might put you either at the tax or even over the tax. And are the Pelicans willing to pay the tax, or how deep are they willing to go into the tax, or do they need to make some sort of consolidation move this summer? So I think these 30 games in this playoff run is going to be pretty instructive, because, yeah, I know Schmidt has been banging the drum of like all three of the Zion, BI, and CJ are probably not sustainable long term. So which two of them, or which guy is the absolute we have to keep him? Is it Zion because the ceiling is so high, even though, highest ceiling of the three, but lowest floor because of the injury risk? Or do you play it safe and go with like BI as your lead guy, and can he be the lead guy on a title team? I think these are all fair questions, and we're going to find out a lot of answers about the Pelicans in the next couple months.
I saw some people were frustrated too that since they didn't make a move at the deadline, again, just what was the move that would have made an impact?
Yeah.
Honestly, it just, when you look at this rotation, but that now they don't necessarily have tradable salary without dipping into the core. And you mentioned like kind of the core element of that is that was never going to happen. Like, yes, if the
Yeah.
perfect deal came along that they could have used Jonas Valanciunas and picks and, Jordan Hawkins or like another smaller salary, if they make a meaningful change, it's going to involve Zion, Brandon Ingram, or CJ McCollum. That's just that's how you're going to upgrade at this point. And they still have if they really wanted to and didn't care about expenses, they're signing trades with Jonas Valanciunas, but there's also between Larry Nance and then step laddering your way with Dyson Daniels money and Jordan Hawkins money, if that deal comes along. But like you said, they're at 158 is what I'm seeing before the Jonas Valanciunas cap hole. And so if he even gets the
Okay.
same salary, they are into the tax. And this playoffs is also going to determine not just this team's ceiling, where they bow out, how they bow out, will determine like, well, are we willing to go into the tax for this core? And if you're not, or even if you are, what type of change needs to be made to continue furthering our progress here? There's so much at stake for them. I don't know if it's, maybe they don't have the most, I haven't gone through that, but like the teams that have the most at stake just this year, it might be them.
Yeah, they're up there. I mean, there's a lot of teams in the same boat of like, it's not necessarily now or never for their entire core, but for the way they are currently constructed, it is hard to imagine that a couple of these teams are going to be built the exact same way next year, or that their core is going to be built the same way next year. Like, Minnesota is definitely one. New Orleans is one. Cleveland, as well as they're playing, there are going to be some major questions that they face this summer, and how they fare in the playoffs will determine the answer. Atlanta.
The Bulls would like to be included in this conversation, even though they don't belong in it.
The Bulls would love to be. Make the playoffs for it. Win a playoff series, and then you can be involved in this conversation. Until then, go back to your treadmill of mediocrity, please.
You said you had one more.
I do. Are we overlooking the Phoenix Suns collectively?
Ooh! I mean, first of all, and they might dovetail just because the move they made with the one of the other teams I had on my list.
Okay.
I kind of feel like, yes, it just like you look at the issues they've had, and they're real issues, but like the turnover stuff, when you have your big three, it's not as prevalent through most of the game. Fourth quarters have been in issues. We've seen defenses blitz them, but you know what's been a bigger issue for them in fourth quarters? Nobody hits a wide open jumper. They still generate them, but they shoot. And I've mentioned this now, I think like 3 times. They have an effective field goal percentage of above 63 on wide open jump shots outside 10 feet through the first 3 quarters. That number drops to dead last in the NBA at about 46 in the fourth quarter. That's like Grayson Allen turns into a pumpkin. Like Bradley Beal has struggled at points. But I look at this team, not everyone. A lot of people thought they needed a point guard. I think they picked, Royce O'Neal's not super athletic. I think they picked the right need, which was, let's get someone who, like, look, let's be honest. Yusuf Nurkic has been good. Grayson Allen has been good. Eric Gordon has had his moments, but there's a chance that we look back at the trade deadline and say, did the Suns just acquire their 4th most important player? Like, that's how good of a fit Royce O'Neal is. And so I think they just checked the right box. And so, like, are we overlooking them in the sense of, could they win it all? I think we are, because if the caveat is just, well, their 3 stars need to be available, well, no shit. And so it's just like, we can't write them off because of that caveat. Otherwise, we'd be writing off the Clippers right now.
Right. And I mean, Beal has missed so much time this year, and even Booker and Durant missed a couple games here or there. So we haven't seen them at full strength all that much this year. It's gotten much better as of late, but I'd say really for the first couple months of the season, it was like, okay, Beal's back, but KD's out. KD's back, Booker's out. Booker's back, Beal's out. So it just felt very inconsistent. But I mean, they're only 5 games back of the 1 seed right now. Over the last month, I think they're 12-3.
Yeah, they've been killing it.
And they're playing like they played the Blazers, the Bulls, the Nets, the Wizards. So woohoo! I'm not gonna go celebrate that, but they've also beaten in that stretch the Sacramento Kings, the New Orleans Pelicans, the Indiana Pacers, the Dallas Mavericks, the Miami Heat, the Milwaukee Bucks. So, yes, I'd like to see them prove it against the top tier contenders. They've got OKC and Denver in a 3 and 4 night stretch. Houston, and then OKC is a back-to-back, and then at Denver 2 nights later at the beginning of March. So that'll be fun. But like that might be a good litmus test for them. But I mean, like if you have Kevin Durant and Devin Booker alone, we saw how potent those 2 guys could be in that series against Denver last year. Now you add Bradley Beal to the equation, you add these other guys, like, they lost some of their depth that they acquired this offseason in the trade to get Royce O'Neal. That's okay. I mean, we knew from the moment they went with this big 3 strategy, they were going to be very, very top heavy, and they were going to have to lean on, they're probably going to cut to like a 7 or 8 man rotation in the playoffs. And that's
they just got someone who's definitely going to be a part of it too, which you could not say about any of the, like, you don't want an Abi already wasn't really playing. It's like, you couldn't say that about anyone that they sent out.
Yeah, like Kid Bates Diop is probably the best one of the four. And I mean, I think you're
They
just
got Josh
seeing this,
Okogie at home. They have
right?
the offensive liability wing defender. There you go.
Right, exactly. And now, yeah, you have Royce O'Neal, who should be a plug and play fit there. So, I think it's similar to OKC. Like their move is going to fly under the deadline because everyone's so busy falling over themselves trying to praise what the Knicks did and trying to make fun of the Chicago Bulls and the Lakers and the Warriors. But I think the Suns got notably better yesterday. And, there's this focus on Minnesota, Denver, OKC, Clippers because the standings are also bunched at the very top of the conference. But Phoenix is just lurking there. Like, hey guys, you do remember that we have Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and Bradley Beal, right? Like we are still a championship contender as well.
And there's two variables that I think one's in favor of the Suns and one isn't. Like the one that's in favor of them is like Bradley Beal has, and this because he missed some time, and I think he was always going to be the player that needed to adjust more. He's had to make more adjustments and he struggled at points, but to his credit, he hasn't really tried to like deviate from the script. And there are just moments when you can see it work and see it clicking and how this is all supposed to coalesce together. So they're going to get better. They might get better on offense is my point. A team that over their last 30 games, I think is like fifth in offense, or they're fourth in offense over their last 30 games. And I don't remember what they were overall on the season. They're sixth for the season. Now, the one that I have questions about, and you watch them and you don't understand it, you dig into the data and you start to understand it, and then you wonder if it holds up in the playoffs. They're just hovering around league average on defense, despite not necessarily having the personnel to do so. And then you start to look at it, it's like they haven't really gotten too lucky on opponent three-point shooting. They haven't gotten teams aren't hitting mid-range jumpers against them, but that's like not the hugest deal. And then you look, it's like they're not a good defensive rebounding team overall. Some of their lineups can be, but just overall they're not. Their backup big situation is traditionally a mess. Like Drew Eubanks might decide to play well for 2 or 3 games at a time, but that's about it. And yet they're a team, and I think people started to come onto this with the Denver Nuggets last year. If you're league average defensively, but you're super ultra elite on offense, you can win the title. My issue with the Suns, and they addressed this a little bit with Royce O'Neal, just a little bit, is Denver always had like some of the individual defenders. Aaron Gordon specifically, they had Bruce Brown last year, and now they have Peyton Watson in sort of a stay. You looked at them and said like they could. You could see the theory of what they were going to do on defense at the highest level, and then you also got Jamal Murray turns it up a notch, and the Suns have that with Devin Booker, like the kind of like Jamal Murray, he'll kick into the next gear, especially in one-on-one situations. The Suns don't have their Aaron Gordon. They don't even have their Michael Porter Jr., who during the playoffs last year, and you don't need to listen to his opinions on the WNBA. I'm talking strictly about his like he comes in, he's crashing the glass, he's defending his ass off, he's like making good help rotations. I don't see that on this team necessarily. And so I sort of question whether when they're going up against teams that are, and I'm not smart enough to know the answer to this. I'm honest. I'm genuinely just asking this question. When teams are going to be able to game plan for them in a best of 7 series, do we see some pullback from a defense that I would say overall, and especially relative to the personnel that they have, has overachieved and is in a spot where you're like if you just take the defensive returns at face value, which again, there's nothing that stands out that's you can even, one of the things I thought about watching them is their offense is so good. They get set, like that helps, but like they get back after committing a turnover or missing a shot. Like, so they have that in them. And so you look at these results, and if you told me they're just the 14th or 15th or 16th, the best defensive team in the league, and that'll hold up in the playoffs, we are absolutely sleeping on the Phoenix Suns. I'm just wondering, and I think we overall are sleeping on them. I'm just very curious to see whether that type of league average play can hold up in the playoff crucible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even if it can't, there is low hanging fruit for them to address on offense, but it's fair to wonder if they're ever going to do it. That they are 26th in 3-pointers attempted per game. They are 24th in 3-point rate. I mean, 4 of their 5 best shooters are shooting 38% or higher from 3-point range. The one exception being Bradley Beal, who's at 36.2%. So they have 5 very good 3-point shooters on the team, and yet they are taking the 5th fewest 3-point attempts per game. So even if the defense does backslide, I'm not saying they need to be the Boston Celtics and fire up almost 53s a night. That's like, but I think there is a better balance that they can find between the mid-range shots that especially KD and Booker are so lethal on, and can we stretch the floor a little bit more? And I think Royce O'Neal might help in that regard as well.
Yeah, he definitely will, because right now they only have one player attempting more than 6 3-pointers per 36 minutes. And that's
Yeah.
just like, even Grayson Allen's under 6 attempts per 36 minutes. And that's like, Grayson Allen, buddy, like that should probably be on a per minute basis. That should be up near 10, I feel
Yeah.
like.
Like you're shooting
And
almost 50% from three, guy. Like this is your only role on offense.
I will say there's room, and we've seen it, I think, for Devin Booker's volume to climb there,
Yeah.
because I mean, when you look at his just like 3-point splits for his career, he's definitely like first team. All his shooting form makes you think he's had a 45% from three season when he really hasn't. But like, I do think the extra volume is probably going to need to come from a Beal or a KD, just because like they're so low. They're barely at, KD's not even at 5 attempts per 36 minutes. And look, it's an oversimplification, but we just went in detail and all this other stuff. Sometimes the math is going to matter.
Yeah.
And so when you're a team, what I think is good about them, we'll see if it holds in the playoffs. Okay, you're a team that, despite not putting a ton of pressure on the basket, like, you're going to get to the foul line. They're actually second in free throw attempt rate on the season, which is, when you consider where they rank as a team when it comes to the share of their shots that just come at the rim, they're actually seventh. I didn't realize they were that high up. Am I reading that wrong? Oh, that's accuracy. I knew. I was like, maybe you don't watch any. They're
That's still
25th.
impressive. Okay.
Yeah, they're 25th in the share of their shots that come at the rim. And so if that holds into the playoffs, is it harder to draw the shooting fouls when it's coming from the perimeter? The guys are talented enough that maybe it doesn't matter, but that's also a fair question as well. But you're right. Royce O'Neal will at least help with the 3-point volume for sure.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm not saying I'm picking the Suns to win the West by any means, but I
That's what
do
I heard.
think, yeah,
Aggregators.
there you go, there you go. But I mean, it like if you held a gun to my head and said it's Minnesota versus Phoenix in the second round of the playoffs, I don't know.
Your
It would be
face just
tough.
said it all. Your
Yeah, it'd be
face.
tough for me to pick against the team with Kevin Durant and Devin Booker.
And,
Maybe it's too simple. Like maybe I'm just lizard braining this, but I
and
don't
they
know.
would definitely, I think they would try to like style the shit out of the series and just say, you know what, Kevin Durant's going to play more 5, and we're going to see what that
Yeah,
does to their dual big
right.
setup.
And yeah, it goes back to my concern with Minnesota. Like all of these other teams, I think are going to have a little bit more ability to change their identity. And I think Phoenix will be one of them, where Royce O'Neal, especially, is going to be a very interchangeable piece with any of their big three.
My final team, I was going to talk about the Atlanta Hawks, but they've gotten enough shine on this podcast because of the actual trade deadline. This is a team that has been not been neglected. We've talked about them, but they've been, I think, neglected on like a national scale. And then they neglected to do anything of consequence at the trade deadline. The Sacramento Kings. What is the pathway to the Sacramento Kings being more dangerous this season, this playoffs, than they were last year?
Does it exist? I mean, Keegan Murray leveling up in the last 30 games more than he already has.
Yeah, and I thought they were a team where you talk about the options that were out there. And I actually think speaking of neglection, I don't think we noted this as well in the, you're reacting in real time and trying to do 4 or 5 minutes a team. You could say, well, what were they supposed to do? You don't give up 2 picks for Kyle Kuzma. And we don't know that Jeremy Grant would have worked if, one, would the Blazers have traded him and his 2 picks were him worth it. But like, we just covered the Suns. You're going to tell me that you couldn't cobble together enough second round equity to rival or exceed that offer to get Royce O'Neal?
Yeah.
Who would have helped you? So it's just like they have more than one biggest need. And I think everyone focuses on the perimeter defense, and I've tried to drive this home because I do believe it. De'Aaron Fox and Keegan Murray have gotten better enough that I think you could have said, well, we need a rim protector who could ideally maybe play alongside Sabonis. But then you're starting to run into the same issues as the Pelicans, where it's, oh yeah, we just need like this guy with roll gravity or who will floor space and then also just protect the basket. You also could have just focused on, because your offense has not been spectacular this year. Like your highest end lineup with your starters, that has killed it by and large. And it's hovered around league average defensively. Those are good signs. You've outscored when you have Fox, Herter, Murray, Barnes, and Sabonis on the court. You're plus 8 points per 100 possessions. But like, there is a void of like wanting that. Malik Monk is more of a downhill guy. And Kevin Huerter, not much of a shot creator. He's gone through some peaks and valleys this year, but his 3-point stuff is coming around. Barnes is just not the same player. He's serviceable, but he's just not the same player. And so you needed more of a multi-level scorer if you wanted to. And they prioritized nothing. And I look at them, and I still think the offense could just do damage in the playoffs. The Sabonis stuff is oversold. Grant and I have disagreed on this. I honestly think, like, what happens if, like, his shooters are hitting more wide open threes against the Warriors last year? Like, I don't think it was just a Sabonis thing. However, when you look at them defensively, I don't want to use the word sell out, but like they are so concerned with limiting opponent looks at the rim because Sabonis is not a good rim protector that it leaves them very vulnerable on the perimeter, even with this improvement from Keegan Murray, De'Aaron Fox. They are among the worst teams in the league at defending spot up jumpers because they're trying to shoot these large gaps on closeouts, and you just don't have this ultra explosive wing or guard who can either shoot those gaps or really just stick with anyone through any type of coverage, which is why I think a lot of people wanted, including myself, wanted them to go after Alex Caruso. We both know the Bulls were being delusional as fuck when it came to that. I hope the Kings at least like gave a real offer for him. And I look at this team and I just don't see, like, yes, they have 7 guys that you could like when you get into Malik Monk and then Trey Lyles, like as part of their reserves. And after that, it's just sort of like, who do you feel good about and how do they up it in the playoffs? Maybe they reached the level of defensive intensity that they did last year, which a big part of that was get your offense set after, or get your defense set after the offense scores. But you were still at this just physiology or athleticism deficit when it comes to what you're doing on the perimeter. And I think you could have looked at getting more because of the way you move Keegan Murray around at the 1 through 4 spot. It could have been anywhere. And to not have that, or even like the fact that they were mentioned among like Pascal Siakam more than they were OG Anunoby. I don't know if he telegraphed he didn't want to go there, but like he was the perfect addition for them. I'm not saying they could have outbid the Knicks or should have. And it's clear if you're not willing to trade Keegan Murray and the Raptors want players, well, then you can't really offer the Raptors anything. Right. So I'm not saying that they missed the boat on that, but like that's to not even hear them linked to a type of player that like they could have let it leak that, hey, they offered 2 first-round picks for Alex Caruso and the Bulls turned it down. Yeah. That probably would have put the fan base at a little bit of ease. The Kings are a really good basketball team, but I think between the combination of I'm more worried about their flaws on defense still. And then just that coupled with how much more dangerous the Western Conference is this year, because I think there are there might be 4 too, where it's okay. The Thunder and the Wolves were not this last year. The Clippers were not this last year, which is to say healthy. And then even we just talked about the Pelicans. Like, so, and it's just like, the Suns too, but the Suns were there last year hovering around. So now you're just dealing with 4 threats in addition to the Nuggets and the Suns that you didn't have to cope with last year. And who has fallen off enough that you don't have to worry about them? The Warriors. Okay, sure. And then like, I guess the Lakers, but like, did anyone, they made it to the conference finals last year. So
Memphis is the big one.
Yeah, so those drop off, but you're still, I would say, let's estimate at plus 2 more threats that didn't exist last year. And look, what if the Warriors or the Lakers hit a stride? Like the Warriors, since Draymond Green has come back, have figured out a way to play Kuminga and Wiggins together. I don't believe in them as a title threat this season, and ditto for the Lakers, but like their absolute peaks, or if you catch them in the right 7, or they're on the Kings and the wrong 7-game series, I'm going to tell you right now, if the Kings face the Warriors again or the Lakers, I'll still pick the Kings to win that series. But it's relative to the West and their deepest, darkest, most glaring flaws. I just don't know how to feel about them. And I don't know whether that's unfair or not.
Yeah. I mean, right now the Warriors are tied with the Jazz, but given what the Jazz did at the deadline, I think it's fair to assume the Warriors or Rockets will leap the Jazz and finishes in the play-in tournament. So right now, Sacramento is the 7th seed, would be playing Luka and Kyrie in the 7-8 game. If they lose that, and
by the way, they count as a threat because they actively decided not to enter the playoff race last year.
Right. And then, if Golden State or Houston jump up into the 10 and we've got Lakers and one of those 2 teams, the 9-10, then Sacramento has to play them just to get into the playoffs. Like, that's a really scary proposition, I think. So they need to really prioritize getting into the top 6. And you asked, you're right. I think their top 7, you can at least talk yourself into being a solid playoff rotation. What else do they need? beyond Keegan Murray continuing to level up, they might just need one of their other young guys, whether it's Keon Ellis or Davion Mitchell, maybe. Uh, one of
I
them
think you
needs to
need
pop.
like Davion Mitchell and Harrison Barnes to fuse together into one player. I think that's
Become
what you
one
actually
player.
yeah.
That would help. Yeah, yeah, that would help. Yeah, I mean, I think they're just like one piece short, and I don't know if they, off the top of my head, if they have an open roster spot. But even if they do, it's not like they're going to be a priority place for buyout signings to go.
They might be, but at the end of the day, it's a buyout signing too.
Yeah, yeah, it's rare for those guys to make a real impact. So yeah, I mean, the fundamental problem with the Kings this year versus last year is last year their offense was like historic, all time great. This year it's just kind of run of the mill, middle of the pack. And when your defense, like if you're building around Fox and Sabonis, you're never going to have a top five defense. You are making that trade off willingly. And you were saying like what you just talked about with the Nuggets last year, like it's you can live with an average defense if your offense is that good. But if your offense is not that good, we run into the problem of, oh, this team, De'Aaron Fox and Sabonis are both incredible players. I think both had a legit all-star case this year. It's not to take anything away from them. I don't want to get caught in the cycle of like, can't build around Sabonis. He's not a playoff winner because he can't defend the rim. But you're right, about trying to pair him with someone of that ilk. Well, like that, we just run back into the problem that Indiana did, building around him and Miles Turner. There are complications with him as your center for as good as he is offensively. What he doesn't provide defensively makes you build your team in a certain way. And the Kings did a really good job of that last year. And unfortunately, this year, I think a couple guys, Herder in particular, are not living up to what they did last year, and it's caused kind of the whole team to backslide offensively. So if they can get back into that, I don't know if they're going to get like top 5 offense again, but even top 10, top 8, I feel a little better about them. But if they stay in this like 14, 15, 16 range, it gets harder to map out the pathway for them to not only make the playoffs, but actually win a playoff series, especially if, Denver or OKC is their first round opponent.
And it is a little bit of a bummer when you look at it in the context of, I agree with you that if you have Fox and Sabonis as your two main guys, you're not looking at a top 5 defense. But I'm also a big believer to get to that point where you're average or better. I think Fox and Keegan Murray specifically have gotten a lot better on defense this year to the point that should be feasible. And the fact that you didn't even like over the, and this isn't just about the trade deadline, by the way, like you went through an entire offseason where you actively decided that getting to the play, and look, it's fine to kind of catch a beat and not overreact. But like now we went through the trade deadline and okay, this is what we still need. And to your point about the offense, one of the biggest differences too, aside from just the individual backslides, is last year Sabonis without Fox was plus 3 points per 100 possessions. This year's like -7. And so like that's a huge difference for them to not have to not be able to navigate both sides of the 1-star minutes as well. And last year remember at the beginning of the year, everyone was worried like, well, Fox can't play the minutes without Sabonis. And then that normalized as the year went on, but the Sabonis without Fox minutes have just not. And I think that's a big reason why their offensive ceiling is, yes, it's, you mentioned top 5, top 8, whatever. That still exists when you have the core members of your team on the court. And the offense has still been like, I don't even know what the offense has been like the actual raw numbers when Sabonis, it hasn't been good. It's in the 28th percentile. I just looked it up. So like to lose that is just bad. And I don't know how to feel about them, but I think I find myself, this might have more to do, say, about the rest of the West, but I definitely feel worse about them this time right now than I did this time last year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're totally right to point out the West has just gotten better. The Clippers were not this scary last year. The Thunder were not this scary last year. Timberwolves were not this scary last year. So they're, the standard of excellence is higher this year in the West than it was last year. And it's not to take away from anything the Kings did last year, because the Kings were a very, very good team last year, and they gave Golden State one hell of a series that could have very easily swung in either direction. But, you need to continue to build, because all of these, Clippers added James Harden. The Phoenix Suns added Bradley Beal. OKC didn't technically add Chet Holmgren, but Chet Holmgren was not playing for them last year.
Yeah.
Playing for them this year. So, all of these teams have added major pieces. And Sacramento, understandably, said, look, we had an incredible team last year. Let's run this back and see if we can continue to develop continuity and more chemistry. And that's great. But the ceiling is maybe not as high as a result, since they have not added one of these big marquee pieces.
Brian, this was fun as always. Thank you for giving me about 90 minutes of your time. I really appreciate it. Are you just able to tell our listeners where they can find you and all the mega ultra fantastic work that you do?
For sure. Thank you for having me as always. You can find me on Twitter, as Dan mentioned, at btoporek, BTOPOREK. You can find Sixers coverage at Liberty Ballers. I do some Sixers stuff and just some general CBA cap nerdiness stuff at Forbes Sports, and then the NBA podcast wherever podcasts are found.
Thank you so much, BT. I'll be talking to you very soon.
For sure. Enjoy the vacay, my man. You've earned it.
Thank you, sir.